The most ideal master is no master. Just ask your neighborhood anarchist. Ronin is a masterless samurai, and my best songs, my best masters, the ones that I feel are my strongest work, are the ones that are made by just redlining the Ableton master and turning it down 1 dB. The most ideal master is no master. A mix that did not require mastering in order to translate to its destination context is always going to be more high fidelity than a mix that did require that extra step. And that's because of all of the phase rotation and stereo image collapsing and transient damage that we have discussed in some of the other classes. So the reason they say fix it in the mix is because you're supposed to fix it in the mix, not the master. Mastering is not fixing stage. You should never be fixing anything when you're mastering. Mastering is just about getting the volume level where you want it to be, getting the luffs where you want them to be. And it should never be relied upon to fix anything. Okay. So how you fix it in the mix is you test the translation of your mix in your destination context, as well as other contexts that, your listeners will likely be listening in. Then you make a list of fixes in a notes file, perhaps, or some other receptacle, but write them down when you listen, play it all the way through, not looking at Ableton. When you're testing in different contexts, you want to make a render and test that render in the different contexts. You don't want to bring your computer over, because when you're looking at Ableton, you're going to be fooled by all the stuff that you can look at in Ableton. The eyes fool the ears, okay? So you test for translation, you make a list in that context, and then you fix it in the mix. And you may want to do several rounds of listening in a variety of contexts and make several, portions of your list. So go check in the car. What do you notice in the car? Make your car list. Go check it on your Bluetooth speaker in your kitchen. What do you notice on your kitchen Bluetooth speaker that you're really familiar with? Well, write all that down, and then go listen on a PA if you can, and test what it's going to sound like if a DJ were to play it, and then listen to it on your phone speakers. Phone speakers are super, super revealing. So I like to test on those and make a list. And another great thing you can do, even whilst you're working, is to test through the built-in speakers on your computer. I will often change my sound card to just the crappy laptop speakers, or if you have my Mac Mini had the crappiest Apple speaker, and it was great to test on the crappy Apple speaker in my Mac Mini. There were lots of times there were things that I would not have noticed otherwise. So test in all those environments, make a list, and fix it in the mix. If your computer is bogged down, a new set of high quality stems may be necessary. You lose no audio quality by doing this, especially if you're doing it at a high sample rate. So don't be afraid of doing that. You'll want to be able to bring your entire computer to bear on this finalization process, because a lot of the best finalization plugins are really intense on the processor, especially if you're using linear phase EQs or linear phase crossovers. You will likely want to have your entire processor to dedicate to this process. And there may be times when you'll want your entire processor to dedicate to just one channel at a time. So new sets of high quality stems may be necessary here. Make many saves and renders during this process, just like the rest of the process, because you're going to want to check for losses. Oftentimes we get excited by the tools that we're using, and we may over apply them. So having these earlier saves and renders, like earlier lossless wave file renders of portions earlier in the creative process, are extremely useful, especially for Frankensteining. And you're going to want to load 5 of your reference tracks into your mix session where you're doing the final mix, and route those 5 reference tracks directly out your sound card's outputs so that they are not affected by any effects that you may have on your master bus. And then if you have those channels with the mutes engaged so that they do not play, then you can A/B between your track and your reference by clicking the solo button on the reference track's channel. And that reference track will be likely mastered to -1 or to 0. And you should be able to directly compare the levels and the mix in your final mix project if you're mixing by either redlining the Ableton Master or just mixing into a clipper. But one of the big benefits of the Ronin method is that you can directly compare the track you're working on to a mastered song, and the levels on the meters and the levels that you're hearing and just the feel of it will be directly comparable to your reference tracks. And that's, it's eliminates a whole extra step, because if you're relying on running a master bus process to be able to compare your track to your reference, you're going to be referencing less often, and you're going to be referencing less accurately, because no processing is the most high fidelity processing that there can be, because there's none of it, right? Yeah, A/B between your mix and your 5 references, and you want to mix in the red or clipped. I will often load in, like if I'm making a bunch of different test mixes, I'll load in my earlier mixes that I made when I was making many saves and renders to check for losses. I'll load those in next to my reference tracks, and I'll often A/B a track versus an earlier version of the same track that I'm working on, because there may be some things that you notice only when you A/B the 2 of them against each other. Visualizers are cool. I love visualizers. I use them all the time. But the idea with visualizers is so that your eyes cue your ears. Your ears must come first. And I know some producers, my friend Pat, for example, who keeps a blindfold in his studio. And when he's doing his final playthroughs and he's listening all the way through to check his tracks, he will actually physically blindfold himself so that his eyes are totally closed, and that will improve your hearing. And I tried it, and I was like, wow, you're onto something here, Pat. So yeah, having a blindfold can be useful. And remember that as important as it is to get the levels where you want them, it's ultimately the hand of the front of house engineer that is deciding how loud the music is, or it is the hand of the fan who is deciding how loud their headphones are or their home stereo is, or whatever. So always remember that implied loudness is more important than actual loudness levels. And in many of the mixes that have been submitted at the end, I'm hearing a bit of distortion, perhaps because I have these Odyssey headphones that are much more high fidelity than the average pair of studio monitors, and then this room is completely treated. So I'm basically listening in like a vocal booth. So I can hear things in here that you perhaps can't. And I have noticed that many of the louder mixes that I've been getting recently from people in this course have been a little crunchy from clipping pretty hard. So just be aware, okay? And when you are preparing your finals to hand in for streaming, I learned from Jade Cicada that it is a good idea to have -1 be your peak level and not 0. It reduces the amount of overs that you get, which is important because every streaming site is going to make an MP3 out of your WAV file, even if you hand them a 2496 WAV file to distribution. That streaming site, unless it's Tidal, is going to be making an MP3. And I suspect Tidal probably uses FLAC or something. And during that encoding process, the overs that, like if you're mixing right to 0, it's going to be overs the whole time. Well, that will cause a constant distortion. Whereas if you're mixing to -1, the distortions from those tiny overs are much less important. So I even when I'm doing the redline, the Ableton master bus to clip technique, I will take the final render and then bring it down 1 dB. So that the peak level is minus 1 dB from 0. And because of the loudness normalization that occurs in Spotify and in, Record Box and everything, that minus 1 dB peak versus 0 peak, it makes no difference. It's your level relative to your peak, not where your peak is, that matters. Okay, so I know it's nice to have the numbers go one louder on your meters, but that doesn't matter. What matters is how loud you are relative to your peak, and not whether that peak is 0 or minus 1. And you will get a much higher fidelity transfer to MP3 or transfer to streaming if your finals are at a minus 1 dB peak level instead of a 0 dB peak level. All right, so that's the Ronin method. Now, there are times when you need a little extra something. And I have always been a big proponent of using any means necessary to get the results that I want. If you get the result that you want in whatever way, that way becomes the right way because you got the result that you want. If it gives you a sound that you like, it's right. That's the end of story. There's no way to do it wrong other than to fail to produce a result that you like. If you failed to produce the result that you like, then it's wrong. If it gets you a result that you like, then it's right. That is the only criteria. Whatever way got you there is the right way. Doesn't matter. There's no such thing as cheating. There's no wrong way. There is only the way that gets you the results that you like or not, right? So when I am doing master bus processing, the first thing I do is clip off any micro peaks using the saturator on digital clip setting with no soft clipping and no high quality mode. I learned this from the Ableton support, and this is the way that will null, like completely, total silence, versus the Ableton master bus clip. That is the exact same clipping. It null tests, it works. Do it. Okay. So, first thing you want to do is just clip off any tiny micro peaks because subsequent stages of the process may be affected by micro peaks. You do not want to be pushing into that first stage of clipping at all. You just want to be removing any random micro peaks. And if you've done your mix down, some people will even just like clip their mix down a tiny bit to remove them before they do the mastering stage or whatever. But if it's needed, I'll do that. And you should only use these steps if they're needed. Like ideally, Ronin masters, no processing at all. So each individual process that I'm going to tell you about should only be used if it's absolutely necessary. But if it's necessary, this is the order I like to do it in. And this is the order I found it more effective in. So the first thing you want to do is clip off any micro peaks. Second, if you want additional width, use the mid-side balance in the Ableton utility or in Isotope Ozone or whatever, because this is not stereoizing things. This is not making that weird zigzag from having a delayed copy with one side out of phase that all those like width plugins like Wider and the stereoize setting in Ozone do, okay? Mid-side balance just turns down the mono and turns up the sides, okay? And then you can adjust the overall gain level from there. But that is a way that, like, if you have mono subs, for example, those subs will remain in mono when you do it this way. Whereas if you use a stereoize or a width effect on your whole master, all the things that were supposed to be in mono when you mix them and you design them to be in mono, those things are now no longer mono. So, if that gets you an effect that you like, great. But most of the time I've found that that does not get me a result that I like. If I am going to add mono to the sub and I notice that there's some wild mono there or wild side information in the sub that I want to get rid of, if I'm going to get rid of it, I get rid of it at this stage. So the third stage is where you apply gentle corrective EQ. if you're going to do like a high pass at 20 hertz, because there's some rumble or boominess down there that's causing a problem, you know, below like 30 hertz. I don't normally like to high pass unless it's absolutely necessary, but sometimes it is. When you're mastering, you may find that the bottom of your kick goes a little too low, or you play it on a PA and it's just like you're getting like overwhelming bass that's either causing distortion or increasing the level too much, and you're hitting the limiter too hard because there's sound that you can't hear that is loud at the bottom. You may want to high pass. If you're going to do that here. If you're going to use EQs, make sure they're on oversampling mode. The Ableton EQ can go on oversampling. If you right click, most EQs will have some oversampling. And then you want to use like gentle corrective EQ here, because remember what EQ is doing to your dry vertical wave edges, right? So you don't really want to do too much EQ in the master stage at all. But if you are going to EQ, this is where you do it. And you want to stick to like 1 dB moves. I try to never go above a 1 dB move when I'm mastering. That's a drastic EQ if it's above 1 dB. When you're EQing and you're mixing, yeah, you might have like a 36 dB boost at some point with the Q like as tight as it goes, so that you create resonant peaks as part of your sound design process. That's fine. Great. That's sound design. But mastering, you don't want to be doing super big EQ moves on the master. It's better to go back and fix it in the mix. But if you must, this is where you do the gentle corrective EQ. And if you must do any EQ and multibanding, do not skip the 4th stage of this process. And if you find you need more bass in your mix, this is where you can try a tilt or a shelf EQ, and that's what I've done in the screenshot of the EQ example. I wanted more bass, so I made a gently sloping shelf at 100 hertz, turned everything above 100 hertz down to, and then turned the gain up to. And I found that that's like if you want to boost, that can often be better, because it's it's basically the same difference, but I like to only see cuts on my subtractive EQs, really. And if you subtract a bunch and you use a bunch of subtractive EQ, you may want to balance it back by boosting. But as my general rule when I use EQ is like cold surgical cuts with Pro Q3 on linear phase mode or natural phase mode. And then I do warm boosts with an analog modeled EQ that has some saturation to it. I find those kind of general principles really work for me with EQ, but it's up to you how you do it. But yeah, if you find yourself turning down like, everything above 100 hertz, for example, as I did here, you may want to add some boost to the overall gain level. So now this 4th stage, this is where I like to put both compression and color. If I'm going to be using compression and color, this is kind of where they go, is after that corrective EQ. If you're going to use a glue compressor on your master bus, which can sound great, the Ableton glue compressor is excellent for this task. Make sure you put it on oversampling mode, because if it is not on oversampling mode, it is not adding any analog modeling. The glue compressor only adds analog modeling on the oversampling mode for some reason. But I got a chance to do a shootout of the Ableton glue compressor, which is made by Cytomic, who is Andrew Simper from Perth, Australia. He is the best algorithmic developer I have ever seen. His algorithms are amazing. And I shot out the Ableton glue compressor versus a real SSL glue compressor, and they were basically indistinguishable. I was shocked. But this is great because you can get a little bit of a volume boost here. You can reduce the dynamics and get it a little thicker and a little bit louder, and then also get that nice color. But I will sometimes do the Ableton saturator on sinoid fold mode here, because that's kind of like if I were using the Oxford inflator, this is where I would put it. So I will sometimes do that there. And this can also be a stage where you're adding changes to the balance of the frequencies. So if I want to add more mids, rather than boosting the mids with an EQ, I may have a saturator shootout, because saturators tend to give you a bit more body in the low mids. That's just kind of what you get with that type of distortion. So a lot of the time I can get what I need from the low mids by doing a saturator, perhaps on a wet dry. And I will try all of the saturators in my arsenal until I find the best one, if I've decided that that's what I'm going to do. If you need more highs, a really great thing to do is to add mono only tape or amp to get highs. And I will often use the tape in Ozone for this. The Ozone Exciter has a really nice tape setting. But the Ableton amp can be great on masters. You just want it about like 2% wet, and it gives you a really nice mono high. And that mono high end, especially if you have a very wide mix, if you saturate only the mono signal and brighten only the mono signal, that tends to kind of like tie the whole mix together, and you will be able to get away with more width in the low mids if you have a very like pronounced centered exciter effect on the mono signal only. So if you're making genres like dubstep or drum and bass or bass house or anything else where you have those just like extreme 100% wide bass synths, this can really fix that a lot, especially if you've adjusted the mid-side balance at stage 2. You may have got the width that you like in the low mids, but at the cost of the narrowness of the high frequencies. And this mono only tape or mono only amp to get you the brightness in the mono can really make that work again. And that can help balance out any additional width that you got from your mid-side balance width boost. So yeah, so that's oh, hang on. Oh, is it doing the thing? Damn it. Now my computer is mutinous today. There we go. Okay, so now after that little saturation stage, I will often do a clipper shootout post compressor and color stage. Usually my 5th stage is like a clipper shootout, and I'll try every clipper in my arsenal. I'll try different digital clipping algorithms. The glue compressor does a great clip, so I sometimes skip the second clipping stage by just using the clipper and the glue compressor. And that's why I've activated the clipper on the glue compressor in my example screenshot, is because that's often what I'll do is I'll roll stages 4 and 5 into a single stage and use the glue compressor clipper, but I will always test it against that digital clip in the saturator, because usually that digital clip is cleaner unless your RMS level crosses into clipping. If it's just peaks, you're fine. And sometimes when I compare my final master to other songs that it's likely to be played with, I may notice that it just needs like another little bit of volume for it to stand up to other tracks in a very competitive loudness genre. If it needs a little bit of a boost and I'm pushing more into the clipper and it's distorting, I'll back it off of the clipper until it's 100% clean. And then I will put a limiter after that clipper and then push a little bit more gain into the limiter that's after the final clipper. And that can